Exposed. 7 Haunted Secrets of a Cursed Farm, where sinister forces unravel unexplained terror. Sarah stepped into her inherited farmhouse in rural Ohio, taking a deep breath of the stale air. The horizon stretched with fields of corn, promising a fresh beginning. But with every sunset, an unease settled over her. The walls whispered as shadows flickered just beyond her line of sight. Emily and Jake had settled into their new home with wide smiles, but it wasn't long before their laughter turned into frightened whispers. They spoke of a man watching them from the corners of the darkened rooms, and Sarah's heart pounded at the thought. Neighbors arrived with pies, their eyes flickering with curiosity, and something darker, a chill that crawled up her spine. They spoke of the farm's past, a tangle of tragedies and dark whispers. Just a story, she told herself. But as nightfall crept closer, fear replaced comfort. The walls creaked, the floorboards groaned, and the children began to wake in tears, their dreams twisted with nightmares. A scratching sound rattled at their bedroom door, sending ripples of panic through Sarah. She raised her hand to her chest. Not now, she breathed, but the sound grew louder. "Mommy!" They cried out, and she rushed to their side, heart racing wildly. "What's wrong?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "The man. He is here again," Jake sobbed, and Sarah felt a chill clawing up her back. Frustrated, she visited the local sheriff, hoping for reassurance. But the deputies merely shrugged, dismissing her fears. "Just an old house, Ma'am. You'll get used to it." Their indifference deepened her anxiety, that tight grip of isolation squeezing her throat. Lost in thought, she began digging for answers, poring over public records and newspaper clippings. What she uncovered was chilling. A family once thrived here, but their lives ended in horror. Just then an inner voice prickled at her skin. She grasped the last piece of the puzzle. The local sheriff, Clay, a man with a soft voice and warm smile, carried the blood of that haunted family. It was as if the shadows danced with delight, reminding her that nothing here was truly safe. As the storms brewed outside, the atmosphere inside grew thick with dread. No more warm welcomes from neighbors, only silence and shivers. Emily hid behind her mother, clutching her teddy bear tightly. When cold spots filled the rooms and creaking doors swung open with no warning, her fear morphed into desperation. "I'll keep you safe," she promised, but doubt slipped in like the breeze from the open window. That night, as lightning clawed across the sky, a rhythmic tapping echoed against the window. Sarah froze, heart racing. "Just the storm," she muttered, repeating it like a mantra, until she heard it again, the whisper, a low growl calling her name. She edged closer to the window and gasped. There, shrouded in darkness, a figure loomed, fingers scraping against the glass. That familiar panic gripped her soul. Was it the man Jake spoke of? Or something much worse? Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system, and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. A thunderclap drowned out her thoughts as she stumbled back, fear taking root. The house seemed to breathe around her, a living entity entwined in malevolence. The shadows grew thicker, pulsing with the storm as if imbued with a life of their own. Every hair on her body stood on end. She shut her eyes tight, taking a deep breath, but the pressure around her grew unbearable. Seconds felt like hours, and as her eyes flew open, she knew she had to confront whatever lurked in the darkness. Whatever whispered her name. But would she emerge unscathed? The figure outside remained still, cloaked in an impenetrable darkness, yet its presence screamed of malice. Sarah swallowed hard, her breath shallow, as she felt the weight of unseen eyes on her. "Jake, Emily," she whispered, hoping her voice wouldn't betray the tremor coursing through her body. Behind her, a sudden crash shattered the tension. She spun around, heart racing, and saw that the door to the children's room had swung wide open, revealing nothing but the blackness within. The stuffed animals seemed to watch from the shadows, their glassy eyes reflecting her panic. The air pulsed thick, making it hard to breathe. Before she could decide what to do, A chilling wind surged through the hallway, slamming the front door shut. Heart racing, Sarah moved toward the children's room, her footsteps muffled by an eerie silence that had enveloped the house. She dared not look back at the window, every instinct in her screaming that the figure was no longer there, but still nearby, lurking, watching. "Mommy?" Emily's small voice trembled as she peered out from the blanket cocoon. Jake was huddled beside her, eyes wide, staring into the darkness with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "What is happening?" Jake whispered, his voice a hollow echo in the quiet room. Sarah rushed to them, enveloping both children in her arms. "It's okay. I'm here. I promise," she said, but inside, the words felt like crude band-aids on a gaping wound. They all heard it again, the scratching this time from the inside of the walls. "Stop it," she yelled, almost pleading, as if she could shoo away the horror creeping around them. She scanned the room, desperate for a sign of safety. "We're safe here." The words tasted false. Just then, something caught her attention. An old photo frame hanging askew on the wall, its glass cracked. It seemed too familiar. Sarah's heart sank as she approached, recognizing the face's too many uncanny resemblances to Sheriff Clay. The eerie calm of the image seeped into her mind. Were they connected? What had they done to deserve this fate? How long can we keep running? She thought darkly. Behind her, the children huddled closer together, their breaths quickening. Beneath them, the floorboards shifted suddenly, a clatter echoing through the room. Sarah was losing control. "What do you want?" she begged the dark. "What do you want from us?" The response came in a low, guttural growl that crawled under her skin. "Leave." The air turned dense, filling her lungs with dread. She felt something brush against her leg, and as she turned her gaze downward, her blood ran cold. A cold, skeletal hand emerged from beneath the floorboards, reaching for her. It was as if the house was alive, feeding off their fear. She recoiled, pulling the children closer, wanting desperately to shield them from the horror unfolding. "Run!" she screamed, adrenaline surging through her body. They dashed for the door, pushing past the enveloping darkness, the floor vibrating with some unseen force. As they burst into the hallway, Sarah felt a rush of cold air, and from the corner of her eye, she caught movement, a shadow skittering into the depth of the house. "Mommy, what was that?" Jake cried, eyes darting around, searching for a safety that felt increasingly elusive. "I don't know," she gasped. With each step, the shadows shifted, becoming denser, wrapping around her like icy fingers. They sprinted down the corridor, trees howling in the storm outside, the wind matching the chaos inside. The scratching continued, now a furious hymn, as if the very house was alive, clawing for their escape. Just when Sarah thought she saw a glimpse of hope, a flickering light at the end of the corridor, the air thickened again, freezing her in place. The house drew in a breath. Doubt washed over her. Was this the way out? Or was it a trap? Lost in hesitation, she looked back at the children, whose faces shone with terror as the shadows began to tighten around them. With a sudden resolve, she shouted, "We have to go now." As they raced towards the light, she felt cold fingers wrapping around her ankle. What had waited patiently in the dark? What would happen if they couldn't escape? A scream echoed from a corner of her mind, drowning everything else. What stood between them and freedom? Would they find the door open, or had the house locked them in forever? They burst into the unknowable corridors, feet pounding against the floorboards, hearts sinking in fear as they plummeted deeper into the grasp of the house. Sarah clutched her children tighter, every instinct screaming at her to flee from the very core of the oppressive darkness that surrounded them. Just a few steps away, the flickering light pulsed before their eyes, a heartbeat that invited them nearer while warning them of danger. Sarah's pulse thrashed in her ears, drowning out the sinister scratching that seemed to grow more fervent with every passing moment. It felt like the walls themselves were alive, their breath drawing in terror, waiting to exhale disaster. "Mommy," Emily whimpered, her voice tiny and broken. The fear in it shivered through Sarah, turning her stomach, knotting her thoughts. "I don't want to be here. Just a little further," Sarah urged, casting a glance over her shoulder. Shadows ricocheted behind them, longer, menacing, hungry. The light ahead blinked with desperation, illuminating a door at the end of the corridor. Painted peeling white, it seemed fragile, opposing the ominous tones encompassing them. "We can make it," she yelled, pushing past the tightness in her throat, and they sprinted toward it, praying fervently it wouldn't lead to their doom. As they neared, something shattered in the darkness behind them, an echo of glass and malice. A lump formed in Sarah's throat, her instincts telling her to turn, to assess the danger lurking behind. Just a glimpse. But a primal scream from Emily cracked her resolve. It anchored her. "Stay close," she shouted, leading Jake and Emily to the door. The closer they came, the more desperate the shadows grew, swirling and convulsing, fabricating a malevolent intent. It was as if they were shapes taking form, an ensemble of whispers and gasps, each voice speaking in terrors and torments of an unending night. She slammed her hand against the door, heart pounding, insistent, as heavy as the sense of doom pooling in her stomach. Open. When nothing happened, panic surged, a tidal wave pushing against her. Was it a trick? It didn't face them open, but she felt the push of something behind them, an almost palpable pressure, cloying and smothering. "Mommy!" Jake cried, and his eyes were wild, darting between the door and the swirling dark. "Move!" Sarah screamed, engulfed by crisis. With a burst of sheer desperation, she threw her weight against the door, and it creaked, hesitated, then swung wide open. The light burned bright, spilling golden rays that illuminated an impossibly pristine room, stark against the gnarled darkness behind them. It was too beautiful, too serene. But they had little time to ponder. "Mommy, go!" Jake shouted the order, his bravery filling the space between them. They dashed over the threshold, Sarah yanking them inside just as something breathed against her shoulder before the door slammed, closed behind them with a thundering clap. The force sent her sprawling, sending the children tumbling to the ground beside her. Pain shot through her as she landed, but the relief of being momentarily sheltered soothed her racing heart. Yet the walls trembled, vibrating with anger. The shadows slipped away, silent but not gone. "Where are we?" Emily's tiny whisper barely broke the heavy weight that sank back into the air. The room was oddly decorated, warmth mingling with the scent of something long forgotten, a sweet decay lurking among the faded photographs that lurked like ghosts on the walls. The flickering light overhead cast eerie shadows. But it was the mirror at the back of the room that unnerved Sarah, most, a pristine mirror reflecting not just their frightened faces, but something lurking behind them. "Clawing against the door, Sarah?" Jake's voice trembled. "What's that?" As she turned slowly, dread clawing at her insides, a shadow inside the mirror shifted, a precise echo of her own form. But the eyes were not hers, hungry and void. They reached through the glass, waiting to it felt alive, waiting to introduce itself. Offering what? She stood frozen, heart hammering, held captive by the dark reflection poised to break free. What did it want? And what had it seen? The house was far from finished with them. The mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water, a grotesque reflection of her heart's terror. Sarah stumbled back, pulling her children away from the pulse of darkness that threatened to engulf them. "Stay back," she shouted, though her fingers trembled on the edges of her fear. Emily's eyes were wide, glistening with unshed tears. "Mommy, it's looking at me." But Sarah could only watch as that shadowed double in the mirror twisted into a smirk, an expression so alien it stole her breath. She shook her head, willing it to be a trick of the light, a fractured delusion born from fear. "It's just the mirror, it's just a trick." But her heart knew better. Jake was shaking, glued to his sister's side. "Can we go home?" A flicker in the room stole her attention. Suddenly, the photographs lining the walls began to change, their subjects shifting into distorted forms, eyes blinking maniacally. They grinned with malice, mouths twitching as if poised to spill secrets of the house. Each frame a horror show. "Mommy!" Emily screamed, curling against her. "Stop looking," Sarah shouted, knowing they had to remain focused. "We need to get out." She stepped toward the door, but the moment her hand grasped the handle, a frigid chill wrapped around her wrist like a snake, coiling tighter. It was a different cold, one that filled her with dread unlike any fear before. The shadows danced around the edges of the room, seeking to envelop her again. "Mommy, don't!" Jake cried, but it was too late. With a resounding bang, the mirror shattered, sending shards cascading like rain across the room. The wicked shadow erupted from the glass, twisting into a form more terrifying than she could imagine. It was no longer just a reflection. It was a presence, a consciousness clawing free, and its eyes bore down on them like two dark pits of hunger. "Run!" Sarah yelled, adrenaline surging as she turned into the room, breathing heavily. The scent of decay intensified, clinging to her skin, choking her resolve. She yanked Jake and Emily closer, their tiny bodies responding to her call for survival. They rushed toward the room's other end. But the relentless whispers grew louder, thousands of voices weaving panic into their hearts. "Find us, join us." The horror stretched and twisted the air, as if the house itself was crying out in agony. Rounding a corner, they barreled into a massive pantry, shelves lined with jars containing what looked like storm clouds inside small glass prisons. Something heavy descended from the ceiling, landing with a thud and trapping them against the far wall. Sarah glanced up and gasped. The light fixture above them hung low, encircled by an electrifying aura that morphed into writhing shadows. "Mommy there." Jake pointed to a tiny door at the back of the pantry. It was ajar, the darkness within beckoning insidiously. "What if it's worse?" Emily whimpered, squeezing her brother's hand. "They are all watching us." Sarah whispered, panic suffocating her words, but urgency spurred her on. "It's a chance we have to try." With a determined shove, Sarah pushed through the pantry door, fear coursing through her veins, a last desperate effort to escape only to be met with an overwhelming precipice of black. "Mommy!" Both children screamed as they tumbled into the unknown. In that moment of tumbling uncertainty, Sarah reached for them, not ready to let go. But the void swallowed them whole. Abrupt silence engulfed the room, the echoes of their cries fading away. Then, a soft laughter rippled through the air, resonating with a malevolence that filled the darkness. A single, mocking phrase sliced through the silence, taunting, "You thought you could escape." Inside the depths of the cursed house, the truth began to take form, dark and unforgiving, awaiting to unravel their final fate. What had they unleashed, and would they ever find the surface again? The fall felt endless. Sarah's heart raced like a runaway train, each heartbeat echoing in her ears, drowning out the fearful cries of her children. It was a plunge into a depth that felt alive, twisting and writhing around them like sinister serpents. Each second stretched longer, morphing time into an agonizing eternity. Suddenly, they landed with a thud on a floor that felt unnaturally damp, a suffocating gloom wrapping around them like a heavy blanket. Gasping for breath, Sarah's mind fought to process the disorienting swirl of shadows before her. "Jake! Emily!" she yelled, her voice hoarse, the panic in her chest igniting a desperate search. She felt Jake's small hand grasp her wrist, while Emily pressed against her leg. Both quaking with terror, in the darkness, a dim light flickered into existence, revealing a chilling sight. They found themselves in an underground chamber, walls lined with grotesque murals that twisted and turned like living nightmares. Faces contorted in pain and horror stared back at them, their mouths gasping in silent screams. Sarah felt her stomach churn. "Mommy, what is this place?" Jake's voice trembled, and she could feel his heart beating against her side as if it was trying to escape. "I don't know," she whispered, trying to sound reassuring even as dread clawed at her throat. "But we have to stay close." In the far corner, a tattered curtain hung, fluttering as if pushed by an unseen breeze. Beyond it, a low murmur swirled, an enticing whisper that beckoned her. Come to us." Ignoring the instinctual pull of fear, Sarah advanced, dragging her children behind her. "There might be a way out," she said through clenched teeth, her breath coming in shallow bursts. But the whispers grew louder, wrapping around them like creeping vines, urging them forward. Each step felt like stepping deeper into a trap. As they approached the curtain, an acrid smell of something rotten hit Sarah's nostrils. Her stomach twisted. "Hold on tight," she instructed, tightening her grip on their hands and parting the fabric. What lay beyond made her blood run cold. A narrow passage stretched before them, walls dripping with viscous liquid, illuminating sinister symbols smeared in dark crimson. Shadows flitted in the corners of her vision, yet when she glanced, nothing was there. "We shouldn't be here," Emily whimpered, her small voice shaking. Beneath the darkness, guilt began to swell within Sarah. Was it her fault they had come here? Had her choice led them into this nightmare? But they couldn't stop now. They had to keep moving. She pushed onward, the passage narrowing with every step, the air thickening that an ominous sound echoed like distant, mocking laughter. It reverberated through the chamber, wrapping around them, suffocating their resolve. The walls seemed to close in, twisting their forms into sinister shapes. "Mommy, it's getting tight," Jake cried, panic evident in his voice. "Just a bit further, sweetheart," she urged, though her heart weighed heavier with each shred of confidence that slipped away as they reached a bend in the passage. Light flooded through the crevice, illuminating an altar piled high with grotesque offerings, dolls with twisted, empty faces, bones inscribed with names long forgotten, and, at the center, a shimmering shard of glass. The same cold, fractured mirror. "Do you see that? That might be. It might be the way out," she breathed, hope sparking like a flickering candle against the oppressive gloom. But before she could reach for it, a deafening roar erupted, the darkness swirling violently as voices converged into a deafening cacophony. "You shouldn't have come here. You'll never leave." Sarah pressed herself against her children, feeling the tremors of fear ripple through them. The whispers twisted into screams, and the shadows began to coalesce into grotesque forms, advancing with sinister intent. "Run!" she screamed, the desperate urgency pouring from her as she clung to her children and sprinted toward the altar, the darkness chasing ferociously. "We have to fight it." But shadows hungered there, emptiness yearning to consume. Would they reach the mirror shard before it was too late? Would the darkness ground them forever? Just as she reached the shards, a voice cut through the uproar, a chilling confirmation of their fate. "You belong here." Now the floor trembled, and the shadows surged forward, a merciless tide approaching. Sarah's heart raced as they edged closer to the glimmering shard. Would it save them? Or have they finally crossed the point of no return? The moment Sarah touched the shard, a blinding light erupted, cutting through the suffocating darkness. But instead of safety, it revealed the full horror of their surroundings. Faces twisted in agony erupted from the walls, their mouths stretching wide, yet soundless, as if trapped in a nightmare, forever screaming, but unable to escape. The corridor throbbed with the pulse of something ancient, something hungry. "Mommy," Jake whimpered, hiding his face against her. Emily's fingers dug into Sarah's arm like tiny claws, the heat of terror radiating from her trembling body. The light flickered, and with each intermittent glow, the shadows became more defined. They were no longer mere specters. They were entities, grotesque figures with twisted limbs and eyes that burned like coal, radiating malice and despair. Chilling laughter floated toward them, hot breath in a frigid void. "Go. We need to go," Sarah shouted, clutching the shard tightly. As she pulled her children closer, she felt a coldness stab at her spine. The darkness seemed to warp and bend, whispering lies and voices she half regretted hearing. "You can't escape. Your sins are here forever, Mommy. Make it stop." Jake sobbed, tears streaming down his cheeks like hot rivers. "Please, hang on." She fought against the rising panic, dragging her children back toward where they had entered. But the passageway had changed. What was once a simple path now twisted into an unrecognizable maze. Each turn they took felt like a deeper plunge into a nightmare, the shadows playing tricks on her mind. Careening left, then right, they stumbled into a chamber where the light dimmed even further. Rough stones surrounded them, and the smell of damp earth mixed with rot filled the air. In the middle of the room, more offerings lay piled high. Teeth, matted hair, remnants of the unfortunate souls who had faced this same darkness before. Sarah's stomach churned, while rising in her throat. "We have to keep moving," she choked out, forcing herself to take one shaky step after another. But every step echoed, the sound amplifying against the walls, turning into mocking laughter that ricocheted off the stones. "Mommy." Emily's voice was barely a whisper now, fear drawing it tight like a noose. There, at the far end, an archway appeared, shadows swirling around its entrance, beckoning them with grotesque allure. But as they approached, tendrils of darkness surged forth, intertwining like serpents, constricting around Sarah's legs. She stumbled backward, each pull from the shadows stealing her resolve. "No, not now," Sarah screamed, digging her heels into the ground, but the pull was inexorable. She felt the force trying to drag her down, pulling her and her children toward the very heart of the darkness. A surge of adrenaline coursed through her. With a fierce scream, she brandished the gleaming shard, thrusting it into the grasping tendrils. A blinding flash erupted, searing the shadows with a light that scorched her skin. Howling shrieks echoed off the walls, pain and rage warping them from shadows as they recoiled. "Come on," Sarah cried, yanking Jake and Emily toward the archway as the shadows retreated, hissing in fury. Their escape felt like a race against time, every heartbeat screaming to escape the darkness that yearned for their souls. Just as they lunged through the archway, a voice echoed behind them, sinister and chilling. "You think you can leave? You'll always come back, we'll have your souls." Outside, they tumbled onto a grassy surface, the sun casting warm light on their faces. But as they gasped for breath, the ground beneath them shuddered ominously, cracks forming that opened into an abyss. Shadows spilled forth from the void, and Sarah realized this wasn't over. "Not yet. Run now?" she shouted, heart pounding. The chase was just beginning, the endless night nipping at their heels. But as they fled into the blinding light, one unsettling thought anchored itself in Sarah's mind. What would happen if they did come back? What awaited them if they could never really escape? They sprinted across the grass, heartbeats hammering like drums in their ears. The sun blazed down, its warmth almost mocking against the cold grip of dread still clutching at their throats. Just meters away from the open field, the ground shuddered violently, as if the earth itself wanted to swallow them whole. "Mommy, please," Jake cried, glancing behind him at the sprawling shadows emerging from the fissures. Panic twisted in the air, sharp and suffocating. "I can't lose you," Sarah gasped, her breath quickening as she pulled them closer, trying to shield them with her body. The shard glinted in her clenched fist, though she wondered if it held any real power against the darkness creeping toward them. With each step away from the abyss, the shadows seemed to flicker, darting back and forth like distorted memories. They slithered closer, trailing after them with a hunger that felt almost palpable, slapping against her skin with cool, clammy insistence. "Over there," Emily pointed, her voice barely a whisper, filled with a desperate hope. Ahead lay an old barn, its weathered wood standing defiantly against the chaos. With renewed urgency, Sarah led her children toward it, praying the structure would offer some sanctuary. The light seemed to wane as they approached, shadows stretching unnaturally across the ground, pulling at their heels, urging them to stop. Inside, the barn chewed at the light, swallowing it whole. Dust motes danced in the remaining beams, casting eerie patterns that made the wooden beams appear alive, writhing like distorted limbs. Sarah hesitated, the oppressive silence gnawing at her sanity. "Stay close," she warned, her voice shaking, the threat of every terrible thing they had narrowly escaped echoing in her mind. "Mom, look." Jake's finger trembled as he pointed to a corner. There, an old mirror hung, cracked and foggy. Sarah's heart raced as an image flickered in the glass. It wasn't just reflections, it was chaos. The scene inside twisted and morphed. Shadowy figures darted, their grotesque smiles stretching wider than possible, laughing in silence. She felt a rush of nausea. "Don't look," Sarah urged, ripping her gaze from the mirror. Yet she could feel its pull, a cold weight tugging at her consciousness. The hypnotic dance of shadows trapped behind the fractured glass promising truths she was terrified to uncover. "Mommy?" Emily's frightened whimper broke through her daze, snapping her to the present. But as she turned, the tendrils of shadow slipped silently into the barn, wrapping around the wooden beams, stretching toward them with a sinister grace. "Get back!" Sarah yelled, her protective instincts flaring. She grasped the shard tightly, its familiar heat pulsing against her palm. "I want to let you take them." Outside, thunder rumbled, and the sky darkened with an unnatural hue. The barn trembled, shifting like it had become part of the phantom realm they had only just escaped. She felt that the ground beneath their feet becoming less stable, like the very fabric of reality was fraying. Towards the back, Sarah shouted, guiding her children through the darkness, determined to find an exit before the shadows consumed them entirely. But the barn seemed to elongate, every corner disguising what they needed, a way out. Panting heavily, fear clawing at her throat, Sarah pressed onward. The shadows slithered closer, a chorus of whispers surrounding them, deep and guttural. You can't run forever, you owe us. Return, return. A wall appeared before them, seemingly blocking their escape. Sarah's heart sank. She turned back, only to see the archway of shadows coiling tighter, the very entities that haunted her dreams pushing forward, their hungry gaze boring into her soul. No, she cried, aware that the only way forward would be through the darkness. Her children huddled against her, trembling. Mom. Jake's voice quivered, filled with hopelessness. Trust me. She steeled herself, gripping the shard, taking a deep breath. We have to face it together. But even as she stepped forward, the ground began to quake, and a low growl filled the barn, echoing from the shadows. The very essence of terror wrapped around them, whispering secrets of return, a promise of foreboding that forced her to question if they had truly escaped at all. And then, a sharp scream pierced the air, pulling their attention to the mirror once more. The reflection was different now. One of them was missing. What if that scream was just the beginning? Sarah's breath quickened, a steely grip tightening around her heart. It felt as though time slowed, a thick fog wrapping around her perception. The mirror pulsed with darkness, a beacon of terror that sapped the warmth from the barn. She felt Jake's small body press against her leg, his whimpers biting through the oppressive gloom as she spun in panic. What had happened to Emily? Where is she? She shouted, voice cracking. Before she could question further, the shadows wriggled like living tendrils, reaching toward the broken mirror with a ravenous freedom, arching and twisting. They seemed to be alive with a hunger that was both enticing and terrifying. She dared a glance at the mirror again. Inside the reflection, a side of her was trapped, a hollow-eyed version of herself that smiled back with malicious glee. Emily was still there, but her face wore a mask of pure fear. She stood just out of reach, her tiny hand pressed against a wall of darkness. Emily! Sarah screamed, her voice breaking. But the shadows churned, muffling her cries. Mommy! Help! Emily's voice trembled from beyond, filled with desperation. The echoes seemed to slice through Sarah's heart, raw and jagged. No, I want to leave you. Sarah gripped the shard tight, the heat now a blazing pulse of resolve. With a surge of determination, Sarah darted forward, heading toward the mirror, but the shadows reacted. They coiled and twisted, ready to snatch her back, dragging her into their abyss. She thrust the shard into the mirror, its sharp edge biting into the glass. Stay with me, Emily, she yelled, forcing her emotions into the shard, channeling everything she had into that moment. The barn trembled again, and the shadows screamed, a cacophony of rage. The mirror cracked, spiderwebs of brilliance shooting out as light tore apart the murky darkness. Each jagged piece glimmered in the dim glow, a beacon of hope against the night. Sarah felt the cold grip of fear slipping away just enough for her to see Emily's silhouette shift, a tiny arm reaching out from within the confines of the mirror. Mommy, please, grab my hand, Sarah cried, her heart racing. Emily's fingers brushed the surface, sending ripples through the fractured glass. A flash of rage from the shadows snatched at her daughter, pulling her deeper into the void. The shadow figures began to wail in pain, thrashing and shrieking against the sudden incursion of light. Hold on. Sarah felt raw power coursing through her veins, ignited by pure love and desperation. She grasped the shard tightly and slammed it against the mirror again. This time, the glass shattered completely. Tendrils of light exploded outward, burning the shadows away from her children while they howled in torment, dissolving into wisps of darkness. With a final desperate lurch, Sarah felt something hold onto her arm. Emily stumbled through the shattered mirror, clutching Jake's hand tightly. They were pulled free, collapsing onto the barn floor in a heap, but relief was fleeting. The barn twisted, groaning like it was alive, a monstrous entity angry at having been disturbed. The wooden floors screamed, ripping apart beneath their feet as a loud crack echoed through the air. What is happening? Jake gasped, eyes wide with fear. It's fighting back, Sarah shouted, grabbing her kids and pulling them upright. They dashed toward the door, but the walls began to close in, narrowing like a vice grip. The shadows, though weakened, lunged again, rushing at them with growing fury. Mommy! Emily cried, terror etched across her face. Just as they reached the doorway, the ground beneath rumbled violently, and Sarah froze, looking back at the mirror. Inside, a figure emerged, a reflection of a twisted, grinning man with hollow eyes. He pointed at her, his smile gaping wider, toothy and sinister. "Leave or become part of the darkness," the last words echoed hauntingly as the mirror consumed itself, the glass falling in shards around them like rain. "Move," Sarah yelled, tearing herself away, leading her children out just as the shadowy tendrils reached for them one last time. The barn sighed in bitterness, leaving them gasping in the open air as the once vibrant sun started its slow descent. Shadows lingered, hanging just at the edge of the field, but the sense of safety was deceptive. "What now?" Jake asked, his voice quivering. "Now we find out what else is out here," Sarah answered, heart pounding. But as they turned away from the barn, looking toward the path ahead, a dense mist crept toward them, thickening the air with an all-too-familiar chill. And somewhere in the distance, a laugh echoed, a sound both joyous and dark, threading its way into their bones. Something's not over yet. The mist enveloped them, swirling in unnatural patterns as the light of the setting sun faded. The laughter echoed again, chilling Sarah to the core. It twisted through the fog, a dissonant jangle in her memories that prodded at fears long buried. "Mommy, it's too dark," Emily whimpered, clutching Jake tightly. "Stay close," Sarah urged, her heart in freefall. She squinted into the thick haze, trying to see beyond its edges. Every shadow felt like a threat. Each whisper of wind echoed with sinister intent. They moved cautiously, the ground uneven beneath their feet. Sarah's pulse drummed in her ears, a relentless panic that threatened to spill over. "We need to find somewhere safe." But where? She felt closed in, as though the very air conspired against them. Jake tugged at her sleeve. "I see it. Over there." A silhouette loomed in the mist, a barn-like structure indistinguishable from the fog. Relief tinged with dread gripped her. "Come on," she urged, leading them toward it. As they approached, the door creaked open, revealing a dark corridor that seemed to swallow light whole. There was no turning back now. Inside, the walls were lined with faded photographs, faces long dead staring back at her with haunting intensity. Each picture held a story, but Sarah felt nothing but dread creeping in like an unwelcome guest. "What is this place?" she whispered to herself, her steps faltering. "Mommy!" Jake shrieked, his voice slicing through the silence. Sarah spun to find him pointing toward an old rocking chair that creaked back and forth despite the absence of a breeze. "Don't move," Sarah commanded, fear curling around her spine like a cold hand. The whispers grew louder, threading through her thoughts, layering confusion and terror. "Mommy, it's just a chair," Jake insisted, eyes wide. But Sarah's blood turned to ice. "No, it's not just a chair." The air thickened as she moved closer, her pulse quickening with each step. In the dim light, she caught a glimpse of something lying on the floor, a small, dusty doll, its porcelain face cracked, eyes dull and lifeless. "Don't touch anything," she shouted, but Jake had already squatted to pick it up. As his fingers closed around the doll, the shadows around them whirled, suddenly alive. The laughter transformed into something darker, a collective sound, a chorus of voices, all screaming, pleading. "Put it down," Sarah screamed, lunging forward. But it was too late. The moment Jake lifted the doll, a rift tore through the very fabric of the air. Tendrils of darkness shot out, reaching for them, swirling like a hurricane of despair. "Run!" Sarah grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him back as she shoved Emily ahead. They bolted deeper into the barn, where the oppressive shadows twisted into menacing shapes, closer with each hurried breath. Desperation pushed them toward a door at the far end. "This way," she skidded on the floorboards, yanking the door wide open. But the moment they crossed the threshold, Sarah gasped it wasn't he outside. They stood instead in a room lined with mirrors, all reflecting twisted versions of themselves. Dark solitude stared back, eyes flashing with madness. Outside, the mist closed in, abandoning the last remnants of daylight. The figure from the mirror not far behind lurked in the shadows, a grinning phantom waiting, taunting them. "Let us go." But as she turned to lead her children forward, one mirror caught her gaze. A vision flickered, shifting images of her life, memories twisted into nightmarish scenarios. She had to look away, the horror pulling at her sanity. The laughter returned, echoing ominously as it filled the room. "Mommy, what is happening?" Sarah's heart dropped. She didn't have an answer. The shadows seeped closer, their icy fingers reaching for her like a tidal wave of despair. "Just stay together. We have to find a way out." But something in her shook, a cold certainty that they were not alone. That the darkness wasn't just a veil, it had substance, a purpose, and an appetite for fear. Yes, they turned, desperate to find an exit amid the labyrinth of reflections. Sarah caught sight of something. One mirror, shimmering with the ghostly light, pulsed gently, its surface almost beckoning. "Wait," she whispered. "Mommy?" Jake asked, fear threading through his voice. Maybe, just maybe, and then she stepped closer, drawn to it. But with every step, the laughter heaved, resonating deeper within her bones. "Don't," Emily pleaded, pulling on her arm. But Sarah could already feel it, an undeniable connection, a promise of something more terrifying. And then, the laughter morphed into shrieks, drowning out everything, grasping at her mind like a vice. The moment hung, tense with uncertainty. What if the darkness offered a way back to safety at a cost? In that split second, she had to decide. Would she trust the seductive whispers, or would it spiral into an unimaginable horror? The ground beneath began to tremble. A choice was coming, one that would seal their fate. The tremors surged anew, rattling the mirrors surrounding them, as if the darkness was aware of Sarah's inner conflict. Fear pulsed around her, squeezing her heart. "Mommy!" Jake's voice was a tiny thread in the overwhelming chaos, but every instinct screamed that danger was close. "Stay close," Sarah yelled, voice hoarse and desperate, her pulse pounding in her ears. Memories raced through her mind, days filled with laughter, sunny afternoons gone so wrong. And now, here they were, standing at the edge of oblivion. The shimmering mirror before her glowed brighter, summoning a haunting echo of her own thoughts. "What do you want?" she shouted into the darkness. "Leave us alone." But the shadows pressed forward, morphing into faces she recognized, lost souls trapped in an unending nightmare, their eyes hollow and pleading. They reached for Sarah, a plea laced with anguish reverberating through the air. Help us, run," Sarah commanded again, shoving Jake and Emily forward as she turned to confront the shadows wailing behind them. Her heart raced faster than her feet could carry her. Each step felt weighed down by dread, as if the shadows themselves were trying to pull her back. The mirror flickered violently, reflecting the torment of those trapped within. "We have to break free." With a surge of adrenaline, Sarah grasped the shard, fueled by the desperation burning inside her. "I won't let you take my life, or my children." She hurled a shard of glass towards a mirror, shattering it with a resonating crack that pierced through the oppressive air. The shadows shrieked, a chorus of horror erupting as the light burst forth, freeing the spirits within. Their freedom ignited a new resolve. Sarah yanked her children forward, urging them toward another crack in the remaining mirrors. "Keep moving," she urged, eyes darting around as the shadows coiled tighter. She could almost feel their cold breath, trailing after them like a ghostly predator relishing the chase. But this time, they weren't the hunted. They carried something within them, their shared, unyielding love. "Mommy, look out!" Jake shouted suddenly, the tremors intensifying as a shadow lunged toward Sarah, dark tendrils of despair snaking through the air, wanting to ensnare her. With a fierce scream, Sarah thrust the shard deep into the ground, channeling her strength, her heart, her fear into a blinding wave of light. No more. The shadows recoiled, their monstrous forms twisting and writhing as the powerful light sliced through them like a knife, sending echoes of wailing back into the bleakness from whence they came. "Go, now," she shouted, seizing her children's hands again. In the chaos, they sprinted toward the remaining mirrors. Sarah could feel warmth behind her, sweetness seeping into her veins as hope surged. Energy poured through her, a final push against the pressing shadows that clung to their heels. She dared not look back, but focused on the shimmering light expanding around them, like an embrace it promised safety. Together, they lunged through the nearest mirror, the world beyond, a kaleidoscope of colors, a brilliant eruption of warmth and brightness that enveloped them like sunshine. They fell onto soft grass, breathless and dizzy, free from the grasp of the malevolent house. They landed in a field bathed in golden sunlight. Above them, clear skies spread like an open promise. Sarah blinked against the brightness, heart racing as she pulled her children close, enveloping them in her arms. The air tasted fresh, a clean departure from the heavy, suffocating shadows they had escaped. Was it really over? "Mommy, we made it." Jake gasped, his face lit with astonishment, and Emily hugged her tightly, sobs mixed with relief. "We're safe." Sarah closed her eyes, letting the emotions wash over her in waves. Exhaustion tugged at her limbs, but a spark of gratitude flared within. They were here, together. "We did make it," she whispered, barely able to process the weight of it. "We always will." But just as the relief began to settle in, a chilly breeze whispered across the field, stealing their warmth. Dread knotted Sarah's stomach. She peered back towards the farmhouse, the cursed land looming in the distance, painted with whispers of dark memories. What if it returns? She pondered quietly, her inner voice echoing doubts that in that instant, she understood something fundamental. Every choice they made resonated with consequences, and those shadows would hunger. They could not remain stagnant. "Together, we can face them," she vowed softly, the words infused with a fierceness she hadn't felt before. No matter what, the darkness might call, but they had each other. No haunting would break them again. Sarah smiled down at her children, the light of the evening sun glinting in their hopeful eyes. "We'll keep moving, always." As they turned away from the past, the wind carried occasional whispers back, trailing behind like echoes of an unforgotten nightmare. But together, they faced forward, the endless horizon before them stretching vast and wide, full of possibilities, with the haunting house receding, just a faded memory drawing its last breaths in the distance. Their laughter joined the breeze, twinkling through the field, a melody of resilience, their first steps on a path of light beyond shadows, and as they walked into their new day, the earth throbbed beneath them. But this time, it felt alive, affirming, promising never to let them go, with the connection that rippled through their souls into forever. You need to subscribe now to catch all the exclusive stories we have coming up. This is the moment to show your support. Smash that like button now to help with the algorithm. We want to hear from you. Flood the comments section with your thoughts and theories about the ending. And don't wait even one more second to share this adventure with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion.